Hello, I'm Brenda Allison, a bookseller at Barnes& Noble. Today, I am so excited to be in conversation with Emma Pattee. Emma is a climate journalist, and we are here to talk about her debut novel, Tilt. Tilt was a finalist for the BNN Discover Prize on the Best of 2025 list from both Time Magazine and NPR, as well as on my personal 2025 list. And it's now available in paperback, where it is our monthly pick for January. Tilt is a story of, yes, disaster, but also of love, community, motherhood, and humanity. It's urgent, surprisingly funny, and very touching. I'm overjoyed to discuss it today. Emma, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brenda. I'm excited.
We're going to try and have a spoiler-free conversation today, so let's get underway. Tilt grabbed me from the very first page and never let me go. Can you give us a synopsis of the novel?
Yeah, absolutely. My main character, Annie, she's about 39 weeks pregnant and she's shopping for a crib that she should have gotten months ago. And she's very hungry and she's tired and she's really irritable. And she sort of starts to have a more and more frustrating interaction with an employee. And then the building starts to shake. And it is a massive earthquake, one that here in the Pacific Northwest we're overdue for. We've been waiting for a long
Mhm.
time. So it's a massive earthquake. And then Annie, when she kind of emerges from the rubble of IKEA, has to navigate her way home and also sort of has to grapple with this strange role of like mother to an unborn child, almost mother, and what that means at a time um, of such precarity.
That is a great synopsis. We've all had stressful times at IKEA, but this one is very stressful. So, how did this novel reveal itself to you? It's your debut novel. Tell us about like how you came up with the idea. How did you come up with this novel?
Yeah, I think many people for their first novels, it does kind of come from some type of personal experience. And for me, that was that I was very pregnant and I was very scared of the earthquake. So I
Mhm.
became really um, obsessed with the earthquake. And I would stay up late at night. I had insomnia during my pregnancy, and I would stay up late at night, like reading about how, what it might be like or how bad it might be, and kind of getting sucked into Reddit forums about how to, how we can prepare for after. Um, and then one day I was at IKEA and I was shopping for something and I was in the warehouse and the building started to shake and I
Oh,
thought, oh, it's the earthquake. And and was just kind of had this flash of like, oh my God, like what am I gonna have to do to make it home from here? And it was not the earthquake. It was like a big truck had kind of backed up to the building and I think like to unload what cribs
oh,
and
sure.
it made the building shake. And so it's kind of as soon as I understood that I was safe, I realized, oh, I'm gonna write this book. It came to me almost fully formed.
Huh.
And it is a funny thing to get that clarity when you're I was probably 7 months pregnant then. So when you're very pregnant, to have this realization that you have to write a book
Hmm.
was bad timing. But yeah, and then sort of right after my kiddo was born, I think he was about 8 weeks old. Just sort of wrote it in like a fever dream.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I want to talk a little bit about, you were just saying like you wrote it in a fever dream. There's a lot of urgency to this book. It's not a super long book. It's less than 250 pages. And the action of the novel really takes place in one day. Annie's having this day of the earthquake. And I basically inhaled this book, even on a second reading. So how are you able to keep up that pace and urgency? You just said like that's how you kind of outlined it the first time. Talk a little bit about your process and how did you keep up that pace of the novel?
That's a good question. There is a very long tradition in Portland of writers who kind of follow a method that was, I think, originally taught by Tom Spanbauer. So like Cheryl Strayed
Oh
studied with him, and like Chuck Palahniuk studied with
yeah.
him,
Hmm.
and like Lydia Yuknavitch, and it's the style of being very on the body.
Oh.
I've never worked with him, but my writing teacher was his,
Hmm.
and so I think so much of what just kind of came naturally is that when you stay with a character and you stay in their body, and they're having, Annie's having a very intense body experience.
Oh, yes.
She's also very hot. She's starving. She's so thirsty. She's terrified, and her feet hurt. And so when you really just kind of stay in someone's body, I think it is actually easier. That type of a pace really comes more naturally. And so, that I don't know that I put sort of as much um, my intentionality was really just to be realistic. I think
Hmm.
that's like, and again with this book, whether it was like earthquake facts, whether it was around marriage, around like ambition, around being a millennial and money,
Yep.
around Portland, and around sort of surviving a natural disaster. I just truly wanted to feel as close to realistic as I could.
Yeah. That definitely comes through. It's interesting. I didn't think of that like bodily experience, but it's so much of the book, it's hot, she's thirsty. It even reminded me of like the first Hunger Games where like Katniss can't find water. Like it's like a very real bodily experience and you feel it in the reading experience. Um,
Oh, thank you for saying that. The Hunger Games was a hugely influential for me, and you're like the only person that's ever sort of seen that connection.
oh,
It's just such a profound, like Hunger Games is so profound because it's so entertaining, and there's such a larger message about our world and sort of what it means to be alive in this incredibly inequitable time.
absolutely. And there's so much here that is, those same ideas. Like it is entertaining. It's funny. I want to talk about that as we get into it, but it's also very visceral. It's very real. It's very human. Um, let's talk about the earthquake. It's kind of the inciting incident in the novel. So much of like, how do we react to natural disaster? We think maybe it won't happen to us? I read before this interview, I read the Catherine Schultz New Yorker piece on the really big one. So let's talk about the big one. Let's talk about the earthquake.
Yeah. So, right here in the Pacific Northwest, we have a fault line. It's right off the coast. It runs from Northern California, up into kind of southern Canada. And when it goes off, which we don't know when that's going to be, but when the earthquake happens, it's supposedly is going to be the largest natural disaster in the history of North America, in the recorded history. And what was discovered about this fault line is that this earthquake happens uh, every few hundred, an average of every like 300 years. And so when people say we're overdue for it, they just mean like it's been more than 300 years. But there's sometimes where there's a 500-year gap, sometimes a 200-year gap. So it doesn't truly mean, that it's going to happen next year. We really don't know. It could be 100 years and it could be tomorrow.
Right.
And yeah, I think like that's it's such a massive disaster to kind of live under the threat of. And for me, it's been really fascinating just to see how people deal with that cognitively and just
Hmm.
the different kind of methods, the like extreme anxiety or the extreme denial, or, it's really, I think such a study in like human nature.
Sure. I live in a place where I live in the middle of the country where we have tornadoes, and I grew up in a place where we had hurricanes, and those are different. Hurricanes, you can see them coming. Tornadoes, you don't get a ton of warning, but like the idea of living, and you do live in Portland,
Mhm.
where this is like looming over you. How did you think about how Annie thought about the earthquake before the action of the book, and then how she actually deals with it as the book goes on?
Yeah. I was really like, I'm a climate journalist, so I was very fascinated by this idea of like what it means to live with something that we understand is coming. We
Hmm.
actually understand quite a bit of what it will be like. And the thing everyone knows to do is to get prepared, and nobody does it. And,
Right.
including myself. And so I was very like fascinated with that idea. Um, and of course that lends itself so much to the earthquake. And
Mhm.
then also at least in my experience, really lent itself to parenthood.
Oh.
I remember being pregnant. Kids were like, are you prepared? Are you ready? How could you ever
Never.
be ready? Right? And then you have a kid and you realize how silly that you spent your Saturdays like painting a nursery. Like what a
Hmm.
funny, the ways in which we prepare are so laughable in the scale of the catastrophe, whether it's a child or an earthquake. Um, and so, I think for me, it was so important. There was certainly an early draft where, like, she just happened to meet a friendly and knowledgeable geologist who knew everything about earthquakes because I'd learned so much about the earthquake that I was like, oh, I have to, I need every fact in there. And so it was such a frustrating but valuable lesson in like Annie really only knows what she knows, which is very little. And
Right.
Annie is only as prepared as she is, which is not at all. And she does all the wrong things. And for me, that was, I relied a lot on first person narratives around earthquakes and natural disasters. I
Hmm.
also relied a lot on narratives from 9/11. And, and I studied sort of how there's a really cool book called Unthinkable, which is about how people actually deal with disaster.
Oh,
So fascinating how like we do such um ridiculous, unexpected things and illogical things. And I just really wanted to showcase that. And of course it is fun, I do hear from readers who are like, I was yelling at her, like, why? Why would she do that? And
right.
um and I love that, right? Like what it feels like writing that book gave me so much empathy for humans just sort of doing the best they can. Like we all really do the best we can in the context of our lives and our brains.
Right. Yeah, there were definitely times when I was like, oh, Annie, girl, this is a bad choice. But also she also had this very like she's in this completely out of control situation. And she often goes back to this like one foot in front of the other
Yeah.
mantra. And I was thinking about, especially reading the book the second time, I was thinking about control. And so much of human conflict is about our lack of control. And obviously, here Annie is just in a completely out of control situation. So, how does control or lack thereof play a part in the action of tilt?
Oh, I love that question. Um, no one's ever asked me this before, but it's so fundamental to me because I think from a climate perspective, we have so much arrogance
Mm-hmm.
around the amount of control we have over our environment, over the world, and over how impacted we are going to be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so for me, it was such there was such a sort of I don't want to say delight because that sounds trivial, but there was such a truth in this idea of this woman sort of making all these consumer choices and very fixated on like,
Mm.
I need this crib because this is the crib I imagine my child in, and so I must have this crib. I've been that person. I've been
Oh,
that.
sure.
And then in a second, the earth is just like, whoop, I'm gonna rip apart your whole life and
Wrong.
your whole city. And that I think kind of this idea of like in some ways how big we are in our own narratives of our life and how small we are in the narratives of the universe.
Hmm.
And I really just kind of wanted to play with that idea of control. And of course that is also so much part of just even giving birth or being pregnant.
Oh.
I found it very unsettling to feel it feels very alien and to sort of see your body changing in ways like you can't really stop it. And you have no, I remember sort of asking like, well, is there's a scene in the book where this is not a spoiler, where Annie is sort of like develops these kind of sunspots from pregnancy, these brown spots that
Melasma. I had it.
okay.
Yep.
Okay. And she like sort of says to the doctor, like, when will it go away? Like, what is it? Like, why? And the doctor's like, no, that's pregnancy for you. And it'll be there as long as it is. Like at the end of the day, we really, gosh, we have such little control. And then in some ways, and this is what Annie's really trying to learn in this book, we have so much control, um,
Hmm.
over who we help and who we show up for and who we are, right? Like in the end, we
Right.
have so much control over who we are, even if we have such little control over our lives.
I love that. And I think that's such a like recurring lesson for Annie and in the book and just thinking about some of the bigger ideas. You talked a little bit about Annie's choices and the people she interacts with. Obviously, Annie is the main character. We hear her voice the whole book, but there's also uh, her mother who has passed away before the action of the book. Dom, her husband, who we know through Annie kind of narrates the book to her unborn child. And then Taylor, who works at IKEA, and Annie interacts with her. There's also a lot of people that Annie meets along the way. Some good, some not so good. I would love for you to talk about how you came up with these characters. They're little vignettes, but they stick in a reader's mind. How did you come up with this cast of characters and all of that?
Yeah. You know, I again like really did rely quite a bit on first person narratives and like the historical record.
Mhm,
And it struck me how much symmetry there was between disasters, even like 50 years apart, that it is like the person that helps you that you expected the least, that helps you and you never forget it. And also the way that people I remember reading some about in from 9/11 about asking for help and someone like turning away and that you sort of
mhm,
never forget that.
mhm,
And so I did. I took a lot of it from 9/11. I took a lot of sort of the flavor of certain types of interactions or certain types of human push and pull. And and I did have someone call out to me. My partner called out to me. A lot of the women really show up for each
mhm.
other in the book,
Yeah.
and I felt for me like that was also there was so much for me about parenthood and motherhood, and this idea that Annie in the beginning is very isolated. You know, she's very stuck.
Mhm,
She wanted her life to be different than it's turned out to be. She's disappointed, and she's very alone.
mhm,
She doesn't really talk about friends. She's there alone shopping for a crib. Like that would be a lonely thing to do. And
mhm,
I wanted to explore this idea of like a shock point, something that would just completely flip her life on its end, and that maybe she might end this terrible, scary day more connected, and feeling less alone and more like really part of a community and closer to other people than she did in the beginning.
um, we've hinted around a little bit about motherhood as the theme, as a kind of this big thing, literally and figuratively hanging over the novel. Again, Annie is very pregnant. And I want to talk, I have a bunch I want to talk about here, but kind of talking about that connection. At one point, Taylor tells Annie, and this is one of my favorite lines in the book and one of my favorite things about motherhood. So I'm excited to talk about it. She says, "You got to be fierce to be a mom, you know, and you got to have other moms. It'll make you crazy doing it alone." And I want to discuss the community of motherhood in the novel and in life.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think for me, when I was pregnant, I was very worried. My idea of the earthquake was like, I have to protect my kids. I have to have enough food and
Mm,
water for my kids. And I need to like protect my kids. You know, this kid I hadn't even had yet. I need to protect it. Everyone's going to be like out to hurt me and get me. And it's so interesting becoming a mom. You are almost, yes, more concerned with your child's safety than anything else in the world. And also somehow the line between my children and other children have really like breaks down.
sure.
And I know for me, you know, I've sort of been over the past couple years. I wrote the last draft of this book after the genocide in Gaza had begun, and I was
Okay.
profoundly impacted by sort of what I saw on Instagram. And you know, I've been speaking out about that genocide for the past 2 years, and
Mhm.
you know, it really for me, the only thing I could take from it was like, oh, the line between my children and other children is thinner than like I actually cannot separate that
Sure.
someone else's child could suffer in that way. And that but somehow mine is protected from it. And so that became such a part of the book, this idea that the way that women protect other pregnant women, right? That we all sort of there's that, and then also the way that like the line between Annie's child and other people's children starts to break down, and what a funny counter message, right? Because Annie's also learning, oh, protect yourself and your child at all costs, and that
Mhm.
is the strangest thing about motherhood for me is it's the intense protectiveness and the intense communal energy. Um,
Yeah.
and on the protective note, I wanted to show um, we just have so many narratives around the amount of love mothers have and the amount of nurturing. And that is true, but there's this other thing that's about fierceness and like warrior energy and protectiveness that we really don't show, I think, in
Mhm.
narratives. And I really wanted to show that. And and kind of turn and I remember very early on I found this piece of research that after giving birth, rats can kill crickets. Rats will catch crickets 5 times faster after giving birth. They
That's
experience
wild.
almost like a superpower. And so I had this kind of in my mind this model of the rat mom, you know? And the rat mom is so fierce. And it's about love, but it shows up as fierceness. And I really wanted to kind of give Annie the opportunity to become rat mom.
I love that. I'm going to start using that, rat mom. And we think about like kind of a maternal idea is like soft and but it's not, right? And I love you're talking about that. There's also a scene, I think it's at maybe like a birthing class, and Annie encounters another woman who on the outside is nothing like her. And they both start crying in a bathroom, and they talk about like imagining how many things can go wrong once you have children. And I have two children myself, and I often say that before I had children, I had never imagined how many ways people could die, but now I do it all the time. And my husband will be like, "Brenda, that's not even like physically possible." I'm like, but maybe if a strong wind. I don't know if you've ever read it. Maggie O'Farrell has this memoir called "I Am, I Am, I Am," and it's like 17 brushes with death, and it's like different points in her life where like things could have gone wrong. It makes me think there's a scene in this book where they go on a baby moon, and Annie gets swept, the ocean, the tide comes in. I would love to kind of explore that idea of, again, nature, life, death, motherhood, how all those things are interconnected.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yes, there's a line in the book, which came directly from my own heart, which is that, she's lying in bed thinking of all the ways her kid could die, and her husband's like, just get some sleep.
Right.
And she says, like, I don't know how to explain to him that some people think about all the ways some people could die and some people don't. And it is, I mean,
Yep.
and maybe that's more of a gender, maybe I'm just saying a gendered thing. I don't know. But
Right.
I know for me that was when I realized, oh, there's just some people that lie awake at night and sort of, yeah, try to catalog all the ways that things could go wrong. And yeah, the scene in the ocean, I think a huge part of the earthquake here is going to be the tsunami on the coast.
Mhm.
And I couldn't write about that because of the container of the book, that the book is following Annie. She's walking
Oh,
and
yeah.
day. And so there was no way to show this wave that could be 100 feet high that could completely wipe out the coast of Oregon in a really devastating way. And so in some ways that scene on the beach is sort of an homage to
Hmm.
just making sure that is included in the story. And yes, and in another way, very much this idea of like the near miss and being out of control. We have massive king tides here and massive sneaker waves, and the ocean here is so dangerous in a way that oceans in other places are not. And so people will come here not realizing that we have a kind of a different there's different safety factors.
Hmm.
And yeah, I really wanted to play with that idea of um, how much sort of the environment around us is impacting us, and yeah, how small we are and how lucky we are. And I
Yeah.
think we forget that how lucky we are.
Yeah. You've talked a couple of times about the research, what the science says about what will happen when the earthquake happens. You are also a journalist. I would love for you to talk about how fiction writing is similar and different from that kind of writing.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know that I have the best answer for this, only because I think I did something that I didn't understand because it was, my first novel, which is that I decided I would make it as realistic as I could. And I wanted it to
Mm,
read like a nonfiction book on the earthquake. And I did not understand what a big task that was. And at the same time, just to write a novel is hard enough.
right.
Just to make things up is hard enough, but to make things up that are actually going to be scientifically correct about a disaster that hasn't happened yet is just such a lift. And if I could go back to sort of baby novelist me, I would have been like, oh, maybe be more loose with the fiction. But sometimes my editor would have to be like, oh, Emma, but this is fiction. Like, calm down, because the amount of fact checking I wanted to do, and I,
Right.
brought in geologists to read the book. I hired a geologist grad student to help me research. And I worked with like seismic engineers, and we pulled building plans. So we pulled the
Oh,
plans from
wow. Yeah.
every sort of piece of disaster in the book is factually accurate based on what we
Mhm.
think is going to happen. And so that includes like the bridges, it includes things like which roads are passable and which aren't. We sort of went through every single street that she walked. And
Huh.
tried to figure out based on sort of the soil conditions we were guessing how that road might have fared or how
Mm.
highway overpass might have fared or how bridges might have fared and which buildings would collapse and which wouldn't.
And how they would collapse and what they would look
Totally.
like. Yeah.
Yes. And like every building Annie sees in the book is a real building. It just, if it's someone's personal residence, I moved it to a different street. So
Mhm.
no one who reads my
Oh,
book will
that's
see
my
their house
house.
on their
Great.
street, but their house might be mentioned just on a different street. And so I really, the timing of her walk, is accurate. And, yeah, I wanted it to be, I think at first that because I was so obsessed with the earthquake that I just wanted to know like what would it be like. This whole book
Hmm.
started because I stood in IKEA thinking, how would I get home? What would that be like? And and so of course I set out to answer that question. And then about halfway through the process, I realized, oh, people I know are who live in this city are going
Hmm.
to read this book. And this is like a very real threat. This is a very real
Right.
thing. And there's people here, whether no matter how anxious they are about it, we all live under it. And
Right.
started to take on a lot of like ethical energy for me that I
Mm.
certainly was not going to scare people just for the sake of entertainment or
Hmm.
gore. And I also was not going to sort of soothe them by making the earthquake seem less bad than it was. And I wanted to truly strike an accurate tone. And so that, and then of course um, I met with first responders who were on site in like Turkey and in Kashmir and who had
Hmm.
wanted to collapse buildings and done rescue missions. And I also got to train with our emergency management teams here. They let me see sort of like what it takes to rescue someone from rubble and what maybe
Oh,
like a triage scene post earthquake might look like. I got to attend an earthquake drill at a school here. So I've sort of been able to and I walked the route just like over and
oh,
over and over
right.
again. I walked the route. I even there's a scene in there. There's a biking scene. That's I hope not a
Oh,
spoiler. And
yes.
everyone told me that's not realistic that a woman that pregnant can bike. And so I waited until I was pregnant with my second kid. Waited until I was 39 weeks pregnant.
And
And
got
I
on a
rode my
bicycle.
bike. Yes. And
Commitment.
it's not great,
No,
not the
can't be.
most fun I've ever had, but totally doable. So yeah, it was just so important to me that that it be realistic and that it be truly more uh, that for people in Portland who read it, that they can feel some sort of trust
Mhm.
in the work that I've done.
Yeah. It's interesting because as you were starting off, like, I wanted it to be very factual. Like, it doesn't read like nonfiction in the guise of fiction. It reads like a story, like a very compelling story. But it's neat to know that this is all pretty accurate. Thank you for sharing. I want to talk a little bit about parents and children. We already talked a little bit about motherhood. Annie's mother dies rather unexpectedly from COVID before the action of the book, and that grief kind of hangs over the novel. I would love for you to talk about grief as a theme in the book and how it affects Annie and her choices.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that maybe more than grief, what I was playing with was expectation. And grief is, right? Like
Oh,
grief is expectation.
right.
That's and I mean grief is so much more than that. But one element of grief is like I thought we'd have more
I
time.
thought it would be different.
I thought it would be different. And so, and there is that kind of like Buddhist concept that like what suffering really is just kind of that you had expected this thing that like isn't happening. And so I wanted to I don't know that I personally believe that or that I'm not pushing that because I
Right.
because I maybe relate a little bit more to Annie on this, but Annie feels very much like my whole life was supposed to look different than it is.
Yeah.
And she feels entitled to a life she doesn't have, and her disappointment is so acute that she cannot enjoy the things she does have. She can't
Uh-huh.
even live the life that's left for her. She's in her 30s. It's not like she's, at the end of her life. There's so much more that could change, but all she can think about is what should have been.
Hmm.
And that's what I really wanted to play with. And that is, I think, what is hanging over the book. And then with her mother, I wanted to explore, and I'm curious if you kind of how did this happen in your life or this show up in your life? I wanted to explore that for many of us, our mothers had kind of ambitions they had to give up on. And certainly
Uh-huh.
if they're our mothers, then our grandmothers, and then
Hmm.
certainly our great grandmothers. And I come from a long legacy of sort of maternal, um, incredibly ambitious women who had to take enormous career sacrifices that then have haunted them for decades, that are almost like lore in our family.
Hmm.
The jobs that they had to give up, or the bosses that, fired them when they were pregnant, or the sort of the dreams that they'd put to the side. And so I think I really wanted to play with that with Annie, with her sort of her mother's ambition and her mother's choices, and then her ambition and her choices as this very kind of like boomer to millennial dynamic.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I have a note here about like what you thought your life would be versus like what it turned out to be. Annie is ambitious. She goes to New York to be a playwright at the beginning of the book, and she leaves. She does write a play, and there's points in the novel where she comes back to like who I could have been, what, kind of that like, almost sliding doors type concept. And she is often harsh on Dom for wanting more. And so my question was like, is that anger or jealousy, or as is often the case, a little bit of both? I want to talk about that idea.
I mean, one of the aspects about this book that I completely didn't expect is the amount of different takes people have on their marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And people feel, I was actually at a party last night and someone said to me, "Oh, and obviously with, Annie and Dom, you were blank, 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 blank." And I was like, well,
I bet people say very interesting things.
is that right? And it was fascinating. And I had never
Yeah.
thought of it. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. No, that's not what I was trying to do. But like, oh, wow. And she had thought so much about it and she really presented a compelling argument. And,
Hmm.
so I think long marriages are very interesting. I think that it's sort of the way that when you meet when you're young, you carry, you carry all these dreams, and then you sort of see either each other fulfill those dreams, different dreams, no dreams. You really, you end up with a really different person than the person you started with, because the person you started with was 20 something and
Right.
and sort of only had dreams. Um, and so I definitely wanted to play with that. Yes, of course, there is anger. And I think there's a lot of warranted anger for
Hmm.
Annie sort of being like, I'm about to have a kid. Like, it may be time to put our ambitions to the side. It's time to get serious. And it's also time to be pragmatic about money.
Hmm.
And then, and then of course, yes, there must be jealousy and comparison, because here
Hmm.
is someone who is just, really ambitious people cannot stop. They are also actually quite annoying. We
Yeah.
really and I'm the overly ambitious person, in my relationship. So I have heard it's very annoying because you can't turn it off. And so it
Right.
almost doesn't matter the success you're getting, or it doesn't really matter what it takes. You just cannot turn it off. And it's a very selfish, in a family dynamic, it can be really selfish. And so I think she has so much warranted anger. And yet also there's something I find, of course, because I am very ambitious, so endearing about Dom, and that he just can't stop reaching.
Hmm.
And that he just has this optimism of like, I want it. I just want it and I'm going to keep trying. And so I think more than anything, I really just wanted to play with
Hmm.
ambition and with how that plays out in a partnership that has very real financial concerns.
Right. I also want to talk a little bit about marriage, about spouses, and the thing you initially think you like about someone becomes a thing that drives you crazy. I think she has a line like, when you start falling in love with someone, you will see the thing that will make you break up. I think it's the line she uses. But like, the first thing she likes about Dom is he's an actor and he's very good at it. And then they get to a scene in the birthing class where she's like, oh, he's doing his thing. He's putting on a performance, and this isn't about me. I want to talk about that like exploration of, again, in a long-term relationship, something that you love about a person being the thing that drives you absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, totally. Yes, I love that. I think, and I have heard this as lore that when you meet someone, you will see the thing that will break you up if you know
Yeah.
where to look. And it does seem to be pretty accurate. I do love this. So that did not originate with me.
Oh, sure.
But I love it, and it does seem, and people write me a lot about that line in the book, so it does seem to somehow have some resonance. Um, but yeah, I think a little bit what I wanted in the book was very important to me is that they are in the context of their lives, right? Every
Mm-hmm.
generation lives in the context of our lives, and millennials very much live in the context of like you can be anything and the snowflake thing and the sort of like aim for the stars and girl power, take your daughter to work day. And the reality of that has been completely different. And there's been so much, financial you know, cataclysms, disasters, and natural disasters and
Mm-hmm.
pandemics. And so millennials' lives are actually shaped by forces totally out of their control. And Annie's life has been very much shaped by like even just how Portland has changed. And so for
Oh,
me, I
sure.
really wanted to explore that because that's something that I see all around me in Portland, that I grew up in kind of a pack of starving artists, and that then we all started to get, priced out of the city, and which is
Mm-hmm.
where all of us grew up. So, all of a sudden we can't afford to live where we are from. And we sort of, then there's a tech boom, and now we're all working tech jobs. But like we're doing our art on the weekends, and
Right.
we're still artists. And then, and everyone needs health insurance. And all of a sudden that seems to really matter. I didn't have health insurance until I was probably 20 something. And now like health insurance is a real consideration.
Yep.
And, and then you want to have a kid. And
Right.
the things you look for as an artist looking for a partner is completely different than what you look for as someone who wants to have a kid with someone. And I don't know, I find a lot written about relationships and marriage, or especially how we see it like on film, as
Mm-hmm.
very lacking some of these
Mm-hmm.
nuances. And I do think partly it's because there isn't maybe, at least I don't read as much, where I see people really hanging on by their fingernails financially
Sure.
and really grappling with like financial ramifications. And so I that was something I wanted to be very real. And as much as I'm talking about the romance of Dom and his ambition, there's something profoundly unromantic about a person that won't just do what it takes to pay rent and
Right.
protect their kid. And so I wanted that, I wanted health insurance to be part of this story, and I wanted gentrification and kind of the rising prices to be part of the story, and this idea that just kind of like we are so rooted in just the context of our times, even if we perceive it to be an individual narrative of like I was a
Yep.
star, I wasn't, I made it, I didn't. Really, we are so little of that is actually individual, and so much of it is context.
And it goes back to that like control conversation we were having earlier, right? Like we think we are the masters of
Mhm.
our fate, but there's so much that's happening around us. Speaking of millennials and context, social media is also mentioned in the book. I love there's a part at the very beginning, and it's like this cataclysmic earthquake. Annie is trapped at IKEA, and she thinks to herself, like, how would I post about this on Instagram? And it really made me laugh. Can you talk a little bit about how you incorporated this part of modern life into
Yeah.
Annie's character in the novel?
I mean, that people will ask me about like why is this book so funny? Like why was it so important that it
Yeah,
was funny? And it really, I don't know that I intended it. It's just that life is really funny, and we as humans have this tendency that in the worst of times to think the most ridiculous things, and
right.
we almost cannot help ourselves. And I wanted to show that like, oh, we are all petty and dorky, and even at the end of the world, we are still going to be petty and dorky. And so Annie is, of course, you
Right.
she is still herself. I've certainly had that happen in terrible moments, being thinking about like the Facebook post or what I'm wearing,
Yeah.
and so I wanted to really like thread that in, and I was very intrigued. When I about if I had to walk home from IKEA on the very first day that I thought of this book, of the first thing I thought was that I wouldn't have my phone, and I don't, that is like I'm part of a generation that learned to drive without a phone. But
Yep.
I meet people who have never they don't know how to drive
They
without
can't get anywhere without Google Maps. That is my
they can't get
sister-in-law. It is
anywhere.
wild to me.
It's wild. And like meet people that I'm like, well, you were born in
You
Portland.
live here.
We're from here. It's just very wild. And and I see that even in myself now that I've
Mm-hmm.
sort of started to rely so much more um on my phone as like as my safety and my
Mm-hmm.
safety in the world. And so I think I part of it was that I wanted to play with this kind of distortion um of kind of who are we without social media. There's one moment where I think Annie reflects that like, oh, there's people right now, in Michigan who are watching this on the news.
Yep.
And to them, they're just sitting at home. And then
Right.
she's like, oh, but how many times have I been that person?
Right.
And watching people suffer while I just like
From a
sit and
distance.
eat my dinner. Yeah. And that's such a strange, strange part of modern life, maybe never more so than in the past couple of years, where it yeah, it's surreal, and I wanted her to kind of reflect on that what that flip was.
Right. Right. Yeah, she talks about it too when she talks about like um her disaster context being a 9/11 and like that, being of that generation who, and now you can mark yourself safe and all of those things. Yeah, it's what a time to be alive. You've talked a little bit about Portland. It is a character in the book. Um, I would love to hear you talk about Portland, how it's an extra character in the book.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like a love letter to Portland, that I have a complicated relationship with. Like
Of
Annie, I'm from
course.
here. I moved to the East Coast, then I moved back. It's such a strange thing, to be an adult in a city where you were a child. I always kind of laugh with my friends when we're at the playground, and I'm like, oh, when I was 15, I made out with a guy at that park bench. The park bench
Oh,
my
uh-huh.
kid is now sobbing because his Lego, figurine got lost in the grass. And just what a sort of there is something very surreal about coming back to the same
Mm,
park in all these really different phases in life. And so, I think certainly it was this feeling of a love letter to Portland. But as I wrote the book, that actually it almost this is going to sound cheesy, but I'm going to say it. It's almost like Portland wrote a love letter to me in that
oh,
book
I
because I
love
think
that.
when I started, I really wanted to leave, and I wanted to leave because
Oh,
I felt like I needed a change. I didn't want to live my whole life in a place where I'm from, and I also felt like I was really scared of the earthquake, and that it didn't make sense
hmm
to stay here.
hmm
And there are people that leave because of it, and I think that's a totally understandable decision. And as I wrote the book, so that was the mindset I started the book with, and then as I wrote the book, I not only created a really incredible community of parents here, who I raised my kids, with,
Yep.
and but also I started to learn about the amount of people here that are preparing for the earthquake. And
Mm,
there is just this incredible spirit of community in
hmm
Portland and truly looking out for other people. And I have not found that as much in the small times I've lived in other places. And I think that what I started to realize was like, oh, of course I would want to be here if the earthquake happens. Like, why would I want to live somewhere else,
Oh,
not my city,
yeah.
and just sort of not live through the earthquake, but also not be around to rebuild Portland? I'm from here. Of
hmm
course I want to be here. And I'm actually someone who could help during the earthquake. Like I actually do have food and water to share. And I actually
Right.
do know like a few things about the earthquake. And so I think it was this for me, this like this sense that I began the book afraid and in some ways pretty isolated and frustrated about the ways in which Portland has changed and has gotten very expensive.
hmm
And then I ended the book truly back in love with Portland and reconnected with the spirit of what it means to be a Portlander and to be part of the city. We have a lot of challenges, but like, God, there's such a civic energy in this city and feeling like almost inspired that I do want to stay here. And if the earthquake happens in my lifetime, that I actually could be could do something meaningful for my city
I
and the
love
people
that.
that matters. Yeah.
And that was not cheesy at all. It was very honest and human, and I loved it. So we are about at time, so I'm going to start wrapping it up. I have really enjoyed this conversation. I don't know, Emma, is there anything else you want people to know about this novel that we haven't discussed yet?
No, I mean, I will say one thing, which I do get asked at every book event in the Q&A, without doubt, someone will raise their hand and say, "Oh, wait, is this a real earthquake?" And then I have to be like, "Oh, oh no. And when it's in Portland, if it's not in Portland, okay, fine. But when it's in
Right.
Portland, like, oh no. And then I'll be like, wait, let's talk after. And
Right.
so it is a real earthquake. No,
Right.
I've covered that. But no, I mean, it's such a gift. It's such a gift to be able to share this book. And oh, there is one thing I will say, and I will not give a spoiler. If you have feelings about the ending, people love the
I
ending and
loved it.
they hate the ending. And if you read this book, wherever you fall on that, you are absolutely welcome to send me a late night DM. I get them every night, being like, here are my thoughts about the ending. Or my favorite is, I can't go to sleep until I know more about why you chose this ending. And so can you please reply to me so that I can get some sleep? So you're very welcome to reach out to me on Instagram. I do reply to almost all of those DMs. So yeah, I welcome all reactions to the ending.
I love that. I personally loved the ending. I thought it was wonderful. We are a bookstore, so I would be remiss if I didn't ask you what you're currently reading and loving or one of your all-time faves. Let's talk books.
Oh, I love this so much. Okay. I just finished Colored Television by
Oh, it's
Danzy.
so good.
And
Funny,
that is
clever, great.
incredible. And I am reading Liberation Day by George
Mhm.
Saunders. It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
older story collection.
Yeah.
And then I just got my hands on the new, well, maybe when this podcast comes out, it'll already be out, but the new George Saunders.
Oh, Vigil.
I got yes, I got my hands on an early version
Mhm.
through much begging. And so I'm about to dive into that. Yeah. What are you reading?
I actually just read Chloe Benjamin, who wrote The Immortalists,
Hmm.
has a book out this fall, and it's spectacular. I loved it. I
Okay.
just finished it this week. Um, and then I just reread Tilt, which I loved. And so yes, I loved it. Emma, I have enjoyed this conversation very much. Thank you so much for joining me. Tilt is in stores now and is the monthly pick for fiction at Barnes& and Noble. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. This was wonderful.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.